We wanted to try and overcome what one professor from Texas calls censorship by omission, which means that there's whole groups of people who just they don't talk to, the press doesn't talk to very well. And a lot of times that's poor and minority groups. And so they're left out of the conversation. And the reason is because many people in journalism look a lot like me, you know, white, middle class. And so they don't have the same sort of insights that other communities might have. So public journalism was, look, get out into the community, start talking to people, invite people into the newsroom. But journalists were reluctant to do it. They were used to their traditional ways of doing it. They were the gatekeepers. They were the ones that said, this is a story and this is not a story. We were sort of depressed in 2003, thinking, you know, we're never going to be able to make change. The economy isn't very good and so forth. Little did we know that this other movement was happening in the background. We weren't quite aware of it yet. So what was happening, though, are weblogs started to come around, and then later vlogs, video logs, and then podcasting. All of these cheap, easy to use, anybody could be a self-publisher publishing to the world. Now I know that that's true because I started this public journalism network blog in 2003. Every time when we go in front of groups, they'll often say, you only tell about the bad news of our group. And this, I've had people from Russia stand up and say that. I've had groups of people from Africa to say that. People from minority communities say that. And you hear it so often. And it's not just the bad news that we do, but I think a lot of times we miss the complexity of the community. So suddenly, if you have your own voice, you don't have to wait. If you're in a little village in Africa, for example, and you can get access to a computer, or if you're in inner city neighborhood and you get access to a computer, you can tell people what's going on in your neighborhood the way you want that story to be told. Yeah, bad information can be shared. A lot of journalists say, we're the professionals, we know what we're doing, how can you trust the amateurs? My response to that is, you might read the newspaper, if you're really a big newspaper reader, maybe an hour a day, okay? And maybe you watch TV news for a half an hour. That's an hour and a half out of the 15, 16 hours, 17 hours that you're awake. During that other time, you're trading information with people all the time. You trade information with your family, your friends, people you meet on the street. And so there's always an exchange of information going on, and you don't have to be a professional journalist. And you can, as a citizen, you listen to one guy because you think, hey, he's a really smart guy. But then there's another person you think, oh man, if I have to listen to him again with his same old worn-out story, take me away, you know. And it's the same thing with the blogs. You seem to, after a while, or anything on the internet, you can filter out in your own mind. This guy has some interesting stuff to say. This woman has some interesting stuff to say. This kid has some interesting stuff to say. This person over here, he's kind of nutty. I don't want to deal with him anymore. That's what our democracy is sort of based on, you know, that whole idea of a lot of voices, chaos almost, people talking in different ways, and then you sort of filter it out. It's always better, I think, to have more voices than to have fewer voices, you know. It's more democratic to have a lot of presses, a lot of people would say, than have one big newspaper that sort of dictates everything.